Hello there, you wee willy winkies. Andy here for WhatCulture Wrestling, and I'm here to ask you one rather large question today. What actually drives change in professional wrestling in 2019? Is it TV ratings? Well, those have been on the slide forever, and while WWE have directly acknowledged them as part of their earnings calls, the steps they've taken to try and combat the slide has only really made things worse. Is it the sponsors? Well, to a certain extent, absolutely. You need only look at the furore surrounding the Fabulous Moolah Battle Royal last year, and more recently the Lars Sullivan controversy, to see that WWE's benefactors do play a role in their decision making. Or is it a new mainstream wrestling alternative sparking a supposed war in a business that has been a monopoly for decades? Well, let's talk about that one for a few minutes. Tune into any recent episode of Monday Night Raw or SmackDown Live and you will have seen WWE's supposedly rigid rosters torn to pieces by that cheeky little scamp, the wildcard rule. Alongside the new 24/7 championship, WWE have used floating talent to try and generate organic chaos in a product too dead to revive itself and spring back to life after WrestleMania 35. And the interesting thing about both of these is that they apparently came from the TV network's influence. If you look at the other ways WWE have tried to keep things interesting coming out of WrestleMania, you of course have the Superstar shakeup, which came just 8 days after the showcase of the Immortals. That was a nice easy win for the company, and they've also hotshotted Money in the Bank into a May slot rather than serving as a traditional bridge to SummerSlam. So they've done all these things, but to what end? Ratings crept up for the first few weeks of talent trades after a historically poor post-Mania Raw as far as the viewership goes, but much like the concept themselves, this spike in viewership, brief as it was, wasn't sustainable. On the other hand, WWE's destructive booking pattern is, the entire philosophy is. Now this raft of aggressive changes righted the right now, but it isn't strong enough to fix the future. All Elite Wrestling via their biggest star, Chris Jericho, have promised to change the universe. And this is more than a mere sideswipe at the competition. Double or Nothing surpassed even the highest of expectations. It was a wonderful show and it had countless fans really excited and fired up about the prospect of a new weekly TV show starting in the fall. But it's way too early to determine whether or not the company have actually changed anything or whether they're even going to. That won't become apparent until we're at least a few months into AEW's regular TV programming, but regardless, Double or Nothing did feel like a richer viewing experience than the average WWE pay-per-view, and, true to their word, AEW didn't book a single screwy finish. Not one. WWE and AEW both have what it takes to be agents of change in the pro wrestling business, but historical context tells us that these things are rarely accomplished through creative endeavors. Dollars, not the nature of the products themselves, has typically been the main driver for change in this business. WWE's finances weren't even remotely threatened by a scathing John Oliver diatribe just 1 week before their biggest show of the year. Neither were they even remotely threatened by the spate of network cancellations that supposedly went down during year one of WWE's decade-long association with the Saudi Arabian Sports Authority. And now, Raw and SmackDown are set to earn WWE billions in TV rights long after Baron Corbin's Deep Six signature move sounded like a grim description of the company's ratings while the big man was on top. Yes, WWE did report a financial loss on their latest set of reports for Q1 2019, but as soon as the latest batch of Saudi Arabian money kicks in and those TV deals take effect, that's all going to go away. The balance sheet is bulletproof. For now. But WWE's bottom line could now face a hammer blow far heavier than that swung by 5-star Cody at Double or Nothing, and it'll all be driven by a change far less ostentatious than that prop throne. And now, comment section, I want you to prepare your own weaponry because it comes to us via good old Shagger Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. As identified by WhatCulture's own Michael Sidgwick, my actual dad, Meltzer has developed this weird habit over the past few years of accidentally burying the lead in issues of The Observer. In spite of, or maybe because of, constant social media digs at his own weariness, the man churns out so much content at an alarming rate that it has perhaps become impossible for him to see the steak before the sizzle. A recent example saw Big Melty completely misread the fanbase's anxiety with regards to Daniel Bryan and his injury status. And in one episode of the Observer newsletter, he just kind of buried news that Bryan had been cleared to compete after suffering an injury at WrestleMania, all the way at the bottom after thousands and thousands of words. A few weeks later, he did the exact same thing when he was analysing the potential ramifications of a fascinating new bill brought in to the state of California. And in tribute to Big Dave's own idiosyncratic style, take note that I'm talking about this in what, I don't know, the 4th, 5th minute of this video, rather than the first. Tribute to the king. And you won't believe the profound ramifications of this otherwise dry piece of legislature that was brought to life in the May 31st edition of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. In his write-up, Meltzer went through the potential consequences of a new AB 5 bill that had been passed by the California State Assembly just a few days prior. Among other administrative details, it notes that if the law comes into play, if it's given the green light and is indeed decreed ready to go, shoutouts to Pitbull, then the following spiel will come into play. And I'm just going to read it to you. All people classified as employees would get labour protection, unemployment insurance, healthcare subsidies, paid paternal leave, overtime pay, workman's comp, and others. The bill classifies independent contractors, and that's the important part here, as workers who are completely free of company control, doing work that isn't central to a part of the company's business and has an independent business in that same industry. This would mean that if talent from these companies perform on shows in California, they would be considered employees. The bill still has to pass the state Senate and be signed into law. So to summarize, if companies like AEW and WWE want to keep doing business in California and this thing gets passed, then they're gonna have to start treating their wrestlers as actual workers. And that's actual workers, not Cesaros. But while Dave was guilty of letting the story linger low in that edition of The Observer, he was on top of it with a piece of suitably succinct analysis. And he called it, and I quote, "a bill that could change the very face of pro wrestling contracts." And that's before other states decide to join in and follow California's lead. And if you think about it for a second, it's bloody California. The state is just way too vast for companies like WWE and AEW not to fall in line. All Elite Wrestling could further the narrative of them being the babyface promotion in this whole thing by just doing it anyway. And let's be honest, we all love a bit of pyro, but this would be a far better use of Tony Khan's billions than spewing a bunch of stuff up behind Cody and Dustin when they wrestle again at Fight for the Fallen. Now WWE, and there's significant precedent for this, may be less inclined to fall in line when they can just have the fight instead. It was on February 10th, 1989 that Vince McMahon committed his most heinous assault on kayfabe and the history of pro wrestling. So say the promoters he'd already left in the dust that decade. In what was considered a controversial contravention of pro wrestling kayfabe, Vince McMahon referred to wrestling as, and I quote, "an activity in which participants struggle hand in hand primarily for the purpose of providing entertainment to spectators rather than including a bona fide athletic contest," and all this was done while speaking in front of the New Jersey State Senate. His endgame was overturning a piece of state legislation that saw wrestling still classified as a sport rather than a form of entertainment, therefore resulting in his company paying more money in the state of New Jersey. Now, sports entertainment was already a thing by this point. Vince had already gone to the trouble of forcing both words into his branding, and this was his attempt at forcing legal tax avoidance in one of the Northeast's biggest markets. Now, the unspoken mystique of pro wrestling, kayfabe, hadn't exactly been shattered for the very first time that day, but it was a hammer blow nonetheless. It was the first time it had been done on such a scale, and Vince McMahon was just looking to pocket a few more dollars off the workmanlike hard graft of his grizzled roster. And what made matters worse was the eventual outcome. McMahon had lifted the curtain, prompting the Senate to pull the rug. It took another 8 years of solid pestering before Governor Christine Todd Whitman eventually decided to push it through herself. And if you have any recollection of that name, it's probably because WWE were so thrilled with their newfound tax avoidance that they pushed her all the way onto bloody television. Between SummerSlams 1989 and 97, WWE didn't hold a single supercard in the Garden State. Vince was all about the outcome, and to reach that, he exerted extreme pettiness. All Elite Wrestling may well primarily be coming for his TV ratings and mainstream dominance, but Vince McMahon, if he wants to avoid the latest calls to completely reimagine the way he does business, is going to have to fight an entirely different battle in California. Or he could finally reclassify his wrestlers as workers and spend some of that big bad fortunes on bigger, better changes within his own organization. Independent contractors, get the hell out of here. But at the end of it all, this is WWE. This is Vince McMahon. Yep, I guess you guys are right. War it is. So that's it, guys, our take on this new piece of potential Californian state legislation and what it could mean for the wrestling business going forward. But now that I've thrown out my spicy hot takes, I want you guys to do the same down in the comment section. Once you've done that, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. Once you've done that, you can follow us at WhatCulture WWE on Twitter and myself at Andy H. Murray if you're into that kind of thing. Bye bye.